Hello, welcome Dr. Sushma Singh this side. Today in Unit 26 Migration, let us start lecture with topic Types of Migration. Migration is of different types. However, there is no consensus among the scholars about the typology of migration. These types can be ordinarily defined as cyclical or circulatory, forced, impeded, internal or external, early or primitive, seasonal or periodic. Trevartha has quoted Peterson, who had suggested 5 general classes of migration. They were primitive, forced, impeded, free and mass. Movements of individuals that involve only a temporary change of residence are generally not considered as migration. This type of movement is known as nomadism or pastoral nomadism. If this movement of the people is along with their animal stock, sheep, goats and cattle between two fixed points, it is called transhumance. For example, Gujar Bakarwals of Jammu and Kashmir move towards the foothills in winters and highlands pastures in summers. When the winter approaches, they turn to their settlements in the foothills. The movement of farm workers is also a kind of cyclical migration because they follow the growing season. Tourism and commutations are not generally considered as migration. Some migrations are cyclic in nature, which means that they are like oscillations or circuits. People migrate between two fixed points. It is an annual cycle to be completed within the same year. Pastoral nomads move with their animal stock in a circulatory way, winters in the foothills and summers in the highlands pastures. The routes and the destination sites are well defined. Here one can cite the examples of Gujar Bakarwals of Jammu and Kashmir and Gadis of Himachal Pradesh. Similar types of migration are common in mountainous regions of Central Asia, Africa and South America. These nomads have grazing rights on a certain aspect of the mountain range, even though they do not own the land. Governments protect their movement and grazing rights. Migrations differ in terms of direction, distance, duration and purpose and motive behind the movement. Migration may be classified as free or voluntary as opposed to forced and impelled. Some migrations are due to push factors while the others are in response to pull factors. In extraordinary situations, people are forced to migrate. For example, natural hazards such as floods, drought, forest fires, avalanches in mountainous areas and earthquake force people to run away from their homes to safer places to save their lives. In other cases, the labor force moves out of the home villages to the neighboring town or the city. They are typical push factors. The assumption is that the local rural labor force is in excess of the demand. As a consequence, the eligible workers move out of the village. Ingrained in these examples is the role of the so-called pull factors. When the unemployment or partially employed people folk do not perceive any chance of improving their daily wage incomes in the home villages, they move out to far-off cities such as Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai or Calcutta. These cities act as magnets. We can define these movements as a response to pull factor. Many a time push and pull factors operate together. It is common knowledge that the major cities of India, industrial and business centers, attract people. The urban nodes have derived their working class from the so-called out-migrating regions such as eastern Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and Jharkhand. The first generation in migrants to the big cities become role models for the younger generation. Its demonstration effect induces them to migrate to the same urban place where their predecessors have already established their roots. Now let us move to the next point, internal and external migration. Migration is also classified as internal and external. When people migrate within the country of their birth, residence or domicile, it is called the internal migration. The word internal here means movement within the bounds of the home country. When people move from one country to another, it is called international migration. Such migrations involve crossing the borders of the countries. Sometimes the driving force is a push factor. When people move out, they have to a perception of relative advantages and disadvantages between the alternative places they want to migrate. Sometimes migration is a well considered and there is a lot of planning behind it. For example, highly skilled engineers including software engineers, medical doctors, nurses and paramedical personnel move out of India in search of better employment opportunities abroad. The idea is to earn more while the home country does not have any scope or higher income. The country of the destination attracts them and induces them to migrate. However, such migrations may prove to be a drain of the qualified personnel in the countries of the origin. Thus, their home country suffers a loss. On the other hand, the destination country is the gainer. The Gulf countries need qualified personnel without spending money on their education and improvement of skills. It has been observed that qualified or skilled personnel migrate on a contractual basis. Now the next point is primitive or early migration. Distinction has often been made between early or primitive migration and forced or impelled migration. Early migrations, particularly in the prehistoric and early historic times, were a sort of random movement and not a planned migration. People were moving out as a result of a kind of human wandering lust, but they were responsible for the peopling of the continents all over the world. These movements have also contributed to the process of intermixing of civilizations and cultures. The next point is forced and impelled migration. When individuals or groups decide to leave their home country in order to avoid devastation caused by drought, famine, epidemics, war, civil strife, or terrorizing dictatorial regimes, it is called forced migration. A recent example of forced migration is exodus of Afghans from Afghanistan to neighboring Pakistan, Iran and India during the US-UK military operation, including carpet bombing in Afghanistan. Similarly, people migrated in large numbers to avoid the persecution of the Nazist regime in Germany under Hitler before the Second World War. A comparable example of the forced migration is of the Irish people who fled away from Ireland to avoid starvation and death caused by the famine conditions during 1856 to 85. These migrations are described as the forced because there is no choice before the migrants but to run away. When a state or country forced a section of its population to move out of the country as they are not desirable, we call it forced or impelled migration. In certain situations, migration can be massive, just as the migration of millions of people from India to Pakistan and from Pakistan to India immediately after independence in 1947. There are other examples of forced migration such as deportation of criminals, political dissidents and religious minorities. During the days of slave trade, about 20 million black Africans were taken to America forcefully to work as laborers on the plantation estate in the United States of America. It is estimated that about 8 million people of European origin were pushed out of Europe under the forced labor policy of the Nazist regime before and during the Second World War. The next point is refugee movement. What happened in history is not always old. In the world of today, people are found leaving their homes and huts, fleeing from one country to the other to avoid persecution and imminent death. They often take refuge in the neighboring countries. In fact, refugee movements are so common these days that the United Nations has created a special fund for the rehabilitation of the refugees. These refugees are homeless and jobless. They have lost all means of livelihood which sustained them before migration. The UN Commission on Refugees helps them monetarily and pleads with the governments of receiving countries to find a place for them. Unfortunately, they are rehabilitated in improvised shelters camps. The so-called Bihari Muslims who migrated to East Pakistan immediately after the partition of British India in 1947 are still living in camps, even though the 57 years have passed. The next point is sensational and periodic migration. Migrations are sometimes seasonal or periodic. This type of migration is very common among the nomadic people living on the margins of the deserts or the semi-arid zone of the world. Stewards noted that some 1 million migrants along with their families make the annual pilgrimage northward across the state line as the harvest of various crops reached the peak. They have their origin in the southern states of the USA, such as New Mexico, Texas, Alabama, and Georgia. A study of this migrant labor force shows that they are mostly young people, usually less than 25 years of age. 70% of them are males and 80% are whites. The return journey is completed in the autumn when the harvesting activity comes to an end. However, things have changed now and this type of migration is on the decline due to the mechanization of agriculture. There is a difference between this type of migration and the temporary traveler. The short duration movement of population is also a type of seasonal migration. There is also a diurnal movement of workers. This type of movement takes place when the people move from their places of residence to their places of work. As stated earlier, this type of movement is called commutations. Thus, the migrations may be periodic, annual, or diurnal. Theata also refers to the periodic movements which are related to the vacations, fun making, or business. But such trips are specifically a characteristic feature of the affluent sections of the population only. The poor cannot afford such movements. In India, periodic movement of millions of people are a common phenomena. These travels are related to the pilgrimage of the sacred places, large fairs such as Kumbh Mela and Pushkar Mela. Millions of people in India go on pilgrimage for a holy dip in the rivers and lakes to perform religious rites. Another type of periodic migration is the movement of an individual from his original place of residence for a period of few years. He visits his home periodically. The main aims of this type of migration is to earn more and to send remittances to the family in the native place to establish themselves after they return to their original homes. There are millions of migrant laborers in the Africa who migrate periodically. W. B. Fisher noted that periodic migration are sometimes tempted to settle permanently in their place of work. However, initially their intention were to remain there only temporarily. Here we want to close this lecture. Thanks for listening.